These are the paint colors I'll be using in today's painting. Pause the video and gather your colors. I listed these down below in the video description. Lemon yellow, cadmium orange, cadmium red deep hue, purple lake, ultramarine, sap green, and burnt umber. You don't have to be exact, just get somewhere close. These are the supplies I'll be using for today's painting. You can find a list of them in the video description. Also in the video description is a line drawing that you can download and print at home. I want you to print the line drawing at the scale you plan on painting it. If you do not have any kind of graphite transfer paper at home, you can simply flip the line drawing over and on the back, apply graphite behind the line drawing. Position it in place on your watercolor paper, tape it down so it doesn't shift, and then use a pencil or ballpoint pen to trace your line drawing. With just the pressure of your pen, your lines will be pressed down into your watercolor paper, and you can then remove. For this particular subject today, we are going to do a blurry, loose background behind these focal point flowers, but in order to make sure that they do not get lost in the madness, I'm going to apply some masking fluid on them. So this is the masking fluid I am currently using. However, I do not like to use masking fluid on just a dry brush. So to protect my brush, I actually use some Dawn dish soap in a small amount of water to protect the bristles of my brush. So after I coat my brush in the soapy water, I'm then going to dip into my masking fluid and apply masking to the entire flower that I do not want to lose. So I'm basically just choosing to color in the flowers. Now, the way you apply your masking fluid is very important. If you rush it and if you're sloppy, then unfortunately your results will be sloppy. Masking fluid and the way you apply it is one of the most critical parts when using it. It's just as important as the paint. So just be careful, take your time, and do your best to stay inside the shape of your flower for the best results. If when you're applying the masking fluid you have a whoops and you're not happy with how it went down, wait for it to dry and then peel it off with just the pressure of your finger. But what this is going to do is it's going to resist the paint that we use in the background so that these flowers in the foreground remain very vibrant in the end. I'm going to do little dots of masking fluid. Where the pollen might go. I occasionally like to re-rinse my brush in soapy water just to make sure the masking fluid isn't going to stick to the bristles. I don't want to ruin my tools. When you're trying to apply masking fluid in thin, tight spaces, just hold your brush more vertical and barely apply any pressure so that the very end of your round brush will be able to get into that tight space. Any little dots where the pollen might be. Once you're happy with the way your masking fluid is applied, just give it a few minutes for it to completely dry. While it's drying, let's go ahead and mix up some of the paint colors we plan on using in today's subject. Now, I had just finished a painting that has very similar paint colors, so rather than wasting them, I am going to be using them in today's painting. But I want you to just take a moment to make note of what the colors are. So the first color I plan on using in today's painting is lemon yellow. And I'm going to paint just a small swatch of it. So go ahead and pause the video and mix these colors as you see fit. The next color I will be using is a lemon yellow with added purple lake. Next we have cadmium orange. Next we have cadmium orange with ultramarine blue and the smallest amount of cadmium red. So since this one has 3 colors, I'm going to repeat that. It's cadmium orange with the smallest amount of ultramarine blue and a little bit of cadmium red. We also have a sap green with ultramarine blue added, so it's much darker. And the colors I feel like I am missing for today's painting are sap green on its own and maybe a brown. So I'm just putting a small amount of water on my palette and I'm going to dissolve some sap green paint into it. Once I feel like the color is where I want it, I test it out. If it's not as vibrant, then I would prefer I just get more paint and add it to the water. Now, if I want this green to be more of an olive green, I'm going to add the smallest amount of cadmium red to turn it to more of an olive green. And I'm happy with that color. Next, I'm going to go ahead and mix up more of a brown. So just a small amount of water and some burnt umber. And I want this burnt umber to be a little on the lighter side. I don't want it to be too dark. And then lastly, I'm going to add just a little bit of a watered down soft ultramarine blue. So these are all the colors I plan on using in today's painting. Like I said, I'd much rather you pause the video and get your colors together rather than trying to keep up with me and feeling rushed. So just work at a nice pace. That's the benefit of a video. So in that time of mixing up our colors, the masking fluid is dry, so I can now just wet the entire background with clean water. I'm applying this clean water right on top of the masking fluid. That's why it's there. It's going to keep the water and any paint that might hit it out. Now I like to look at my paper from a side glance using the lights, just to make sure there's no areas that are completely dry. And once I am confirmed that everything is very saturated and glossy, then I can begin adding color. However, keep in mind, this is that step that we want to kind of move quickly with. So I'm going to grab some lemon yellow, and I'm going to add some lemon yellow over on the left edge here. And anytime I'm adding, kind of a hint of maybe a flower, I try to do them at just different heights and shapes. So I'm avoiding patterns. And these are just blurred flowers in the background, so don't feel like they have to be perfect. This paper wants to dry, so we need to get these little colors in and get out. I'm now going to grab some of that olive green. And this is a lighter olive green. And I'm trying not to completely fill in everything because I do want some space for some orange flowers that I plan on bringing in. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I'm trying to be mindful of having different heights and different size flowers. I'm going to rinse my brush, tap my sponge so I don't dilute my color, and I am going to get just the softest amount of blue in at the top. I'm now going to rinse the blue out of my brush before I go down too far. And with my damp brush, I'm going to just kind of drag some of that color down by avoiding hitting some of my yellows. I'm switching to my number 6 round. I want to get some hints of orange flowers in. So before things get too far along, I need to pick up my pace and just put some shapes in here that might imply flowers. Everything is drying very fast, which is normal. So rather than overthinking where the shapes go and what they're supposed to be, I just rather you get your color in so you can get out. I'm going to use some more of the lemon yellow to reestablish any of the yellow flowers that might be kind of losing their space due to the other colors. So typically the last couple colors that you apply are the ones that are kind of pushing other colors out of the way. I'm going to grab some more of that olive green, and in the remaining white space between my flowers here, I'm just going to add more of this color. But things are already beginning to dry, so I'm going to have to move quickly. I'm going to grab some of the darker orange, but I'm going to wipe my brush off really well on my palette before bringing the color over to my painting. And since there are some areas beginning to dry, if I get some blooms and textures, I'm not going to fight it. Okay, it's just going to make my painting look more like a painting, and it's going to add some interesting texture. So rather than completely fighting it and getting frustrated, I'm going to remind myself that this is supposed to be fun. I'm not entering this painting into some sort of competition. I'm just doing this to kind of practice my skills and to see what happens. So I'm trying to vary my shapes and sizes as I do this. I can grab more of this olive green, and if I want, I can give just a few hints of maybe some grass blades by just dragging my brush more vertical. I'm going to switch to my really dark green that has the added ultramarine blue. And I'm just trying to add some other textures in here to imply some plants. If I want to add some lines to kind of hint at some additional grass textures, I can. But everybody's background with this particular style is going to turn out a little different. And I think that's the exciting part. So try not to put so much pressure on yourself and just have fun. Adding some more of that dark green. And to loosen it up a little bit, I think I'm going to add some splatters of yellow. I always feel like when I add splatters of yellow, it reminds me to just loosen up and relax. I'm just continuing to play. And I'm fiddling through that drying stage, which is typically not something I do, but apparently today I'm moving a little slower with my painting pace. So I'm just trying to remind myself to just have some fun, see what happens. Trying to decide what else I might want to do. I'm going to grab some of that golden yellow. Add some of it here and there. And a lot of times I'm just asking myself, is this an interesting shape? And if it is, then I kind of move on. But if I see an area where the shapes are kind of boring or they're all the same, I try to remind myself to just take a moment to add some variety in with the shapes. So it's a little bit more fun to look at. All right, we wanted a loose abstract background and we got it. Time to let this dry so we can move on. Now that everything is completely dry, I can come in with more control on a dry surface and add some additional details. So with this next layer, I just want to make sure any colors I'm using are watered down for more of a glaze. So I am looking to just add some subtle changes in color or tone. Without any big dark colors. So my color is more like tea. And I'm just coming into a few areas, choosing to just add some darks, using gentle pressure. If I end up lightening up some of the underlying colors, it's just a part of the process. So again, this is just watered down brown. Very, very watered down, not very dark at all. I'm going to rinse my brush and I'm going to take some of that dark green that the added ultramarine blue to. I'm going to water it down so it's another glaze. And just in a few areas where maybe I'm like, I want just a slightly darker color so that those foreground flowers will pop when I paint them later. But one of the best parts about working in a watered down glaze is you're just making the most subtle changes in color And wherever the edges are to your glaze, a lot of times if it's watered down enough, you're not even going to notice. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. Now, if there's any areas where there are textures that you're just not a fan of, just take a damp brush and with gentle pressure, you can move over the texture with a circular motion and you can just soften it. Just rinse your brush when you're in between colors. So I'm just using barely any water, a very mildly damp brush with very gentle pressure. Just doing circular motions over some of the edges that maybe I want softened so it shows less texture. All right, I'm going to hit this with a blow dryer once more so I can begin painting the focal point. Now that everything is completely dry, I can use either my fingers to just rub with firm pressure to remove the masking fluid, or I can use a rubber cement pickup. You can find them in the drawing section of most art supply stores. And I just rub with firm pressure, and it just picks up more of the stubborn masking fluid that can sometimes want to stay on the paper. Now that the masking fluid is up, I can begin painting these flowers. So I'm just going to use a small number 2 round, and I'm going to use my lemon yellow, and the flower that is to the left, I'm just going to fill in this whole flower with this lemon yellow. If a little bit of it gets on the background, I'm not worried about it because it's very much the same color palette as the background. This flower in the foreground here is more of an orange yellow. So I'm just going to take some of my cadmium yellow and mix it with the lemon yellow. Once I have a nice yellow-orange that I'm happy with, I'm just going to fill in this flower. I'm going to use this same yellow-orange on the flower bud. Now my first flower is still a little bit damp, so I need to switch gears and focus on the stems while the flowers dry. I'm going to use a dark green on the flower stems, sap green with added ultramarine blue, and I just want to use very little water, just enough to make sure it still feels like watercolor, but without it becoming goopy. I wipe away the excess and even tap my sponge, and I hold my brush more vertical as I paint this flower stem. If the green is not dark enough, you won't have good contrast between your stem and the background. So adjust your color if necessary, if it's not showing up. While those flower stems are drying, I'm going to just bring myself a little bit of attention to the background. So I'm going to use a stiff square brush. I'm going to get it wet with clean water, and I'm going to wipe away the little droplets that like to hang out on the metal ferrule. That way they don't drip on me. But I'm going to keep all of this moisture in, and I'm just going to find a few areas where maybe I want to give a hint of just a lighter color. And by just dragging my damp square brush across my background, I can kind of hint at some texture here. So I'm just kind of moving in a pinwheel type shape without the goal of kind of making any one thing particular. I'm just adding some shapes to give a little bit more interest to the background. Now the color I lift and erase does end up on my paintbrush, so I have to occasionally re-rinse it and get rid of the droplets. You'll find that the dark green with the ultramarine blue added to it does not like to lift very well because that ultramarine blue is more of a staining pigment. So I'm just going through and adding some negative space around some shapes without overdoing it to where everything all of a sudden starts looking intentional. I can do this same thing with some of the orange. I can just kind of lift out some negative space to change the shapes. So basically, if I see an edge that looks a little too round or a little too, I don't know, perfect, too symmetrical, I try and just lift out some negative space in that area. And then I can come back through with glazes of color to fill some of this negative space in to add a little bit more interest. I can also use this technique to lift out some negative space up where the grasses and ground textures meet the sky. So the goal is not necessarily to get bright whites, but maybe just get a range of values. Maybe everything just started blending in. I just have to be mindful of my foreground flowers so that I don't accidentally hit them. I find lifting colors really satisfying. And this technique typically only works when you're working on quality paper. Otherwise, the cheaper papers will begin tearing under this technique and they won't stand up to it. So anywhere where I feel like, you know what, I just don't have any shapes in there that are adding a variety, that's where I come in and do a little bit of lifting just to change things up a bit. All right, my flowers are now dry, so I can begin adding some detail to them. So I'm going to get more of that lemon yellow, but I'm going to add the smallest amount of orange. And I'm going to add some color to the foreground petals. So the ones that are coming right at us. So I'm just using this lighter orange yellow color to just give a little bit more definition in a couple areas on this flower. I'm going to grab more of the orange yellow that I used on the second flower. I'm going to darken it up just a bit. And again, I'm going to do a glaze on the petals that are closest to me. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I'm going to get some of that olive green. I'm going to return to the first flower and just give a little bit of color on the underside. I'm going to grab some of the darker orange that has the added cadmium red. I'm wiping my brush off really good on this one, so I have just barely any paint on my brush, and that's going to help me get small, narrow lines on the flower bud without them becoming too overwhelming. I'm going to return to the first flower, and I'm going to use the darker golden yellow that has the added purple lake to it. And I want to just kind of create some texture here in the center. To imply some of that pollen. I'm going to grab more of that vibrant lemon yellow. Add some of that color to the little pollen ends. I'm going to do the same thing with this yellow on the flower to the right. I'm going to get some of that olive green to put at the base of this flower. And while these flowers are drying, I need to just give a little bit more attention to the areas that I lifted in the background. So some areas where I lifted and it looks more white, I might choose to come in and do a little glaze of yellow or green or orange, whatever it might be. So I'm just coming in and doing a small glaze to give some of the areas that I lifted at least a hint of color. Keep in mind, I'm not going very dark. Sometimes it's an olive green, sometimes it's a lime green or a yellow. So whatever you feel like your painting needs. Don't feel like you need to try and match this. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of a loose painting or background is to just kind of have fun and experiment. So I'm just kind of going through and seeing where I have all the same color and seeing if I can add just a touch of something else to give a little bit more interest. I just have to be cautious that I don't take away and distract from the focal point flowers. I'm going to return to the focal point flowers and give a little bit more contrast to them. So I want them to really pop forward more. So I need to darken up the background around them so that they really stand out. So I'm going to use a glaze of that blue-green. And once I get around part way, I just use water to kind of help spread the outer edge of that glaze so you can't really tell it was done. Once I feel like the flower has good contrast, I move on to the second flower. So anytime you want something to really stand out from the background, you got to be willing to push the contrast so it pops out. Once you have that contrast that you're looking for, if you need to soften the edge of whatever the glaze was you did, just bring in some clean water and pull from the outer edge so it blends more in with the surrounding. And keep in mind, it's a messy background, so if you have some texture, it's okay. Continuing to just darken up the background around this flower. Using clean water on the top edge before it dries to kind of blend it. And now if I need to, I can add more details to the pollen. So I'm going to get a little bit of the brown. Now this is a watered down brown, so it's not too dark. And I'm going to come to the center of this first flower. I'm just going to add some line work. Very light touch. I can do the same thing to the flower on the left. I just have to make sure I don't run into any damp paper from my glaze. Otherwise, you might want to dry things. I'm going to get some of that dark orange that has the added ultramarine blue. And I'm going to darken up some pollen texture in the center. I'm not trying to cover up the ones that are yellow. I'm just adding to it to make it look more full. And it's okay if they run into each other. I'm going to do the same thing on this first flower. Being mindful of where my paper might be wet and staying away from it. Now the flower bud needs more greens, so I'm going to get more of those dark greens with the added ultramarine blue. If there's any areas on your flowers where you feel like the greens need to be a little darker, especially on the underside, you can do that with a second layer. And now that these flowers are kind of popping out more, this is where you get to kind of play with other textures, see if there's anything else you want to add. It's really up to you. If we want, we can add a little leaf. Notice how crooked and wiggly I make my leaves. I'm not worried about them being perfect. I'm just trying to have fun with the shapes. Just adding some darks here and there. I can use some of the olive green to kind of bring in some more textures. But I don't want to do too many details in the background where it pulls it away from the focal point. So I'm just doing a splash of color here, a splash of color there. Now, this is a nice stage where if you are someone who likes to use gouache, you could involve gouache to add some details on top. Where you take it from here is really up to you. But I hope you found this loose type style just playful and relaxing, and it's kind of something you can always experiment with. And every time you sit down and do it, you're going to come out with something different. So give it a try, be open to it, and just have fun. Have a fantastic week.